The world is moving fast. If you look at a modern factory, you will see artificial intelligence and robots performing routine tasks that used to require thousands of workers. At this exact moment, India has a unique advantage. We have the largest population of young people on the planet. But the old way of schooling wasn't designed for this. For a long time, we treated student minds like computer hard drives, cramming them full of facts just to be memorized and repeated for a grade. The National Education Policy 2020 changes that goal. The focus is no longer on how much you can memorize, but on learning how to think, solve problems, and ultimately how to learn on your own. To succeed in a world full of smart machines, our students need to bring what computers cannot: creativity and the ability to innovate. In the past, the school system forced you into a narrow lane. You were separated into arts, sciences, or vocational tracks, and it was very difficult to change your mind once you started. This new policy removes those walls. It creates an interconnected web where you can study physics alongside music or fashion design, allowing you to choose the subjects that actually fit your interests. By mixing these different fields, the priority shifts toward deep understanding. You spend less time worrying about exam coaching and more time seeing how different ideas connect in the real world. Tests are changing too. Instead of one high-stakes exam that decides your entire future, teachers will use regular, helpful check-ins to map your growth and see where you need extra support. School now functions as a flexible toolkit to help you build your own life and adapt to whatever the future brings. This flexible way of teaching might sound like a new invention, but it is actually a return to India's earliest ways of learning. These ancient ruins of Nalanda University mark a place where students once mastered different subjects at once, from medicine and philosophy to astronomy and art. It was the same at the huge campus at Takshashila, well known for its wide-ranging curriculum that attracted scholars from across the globe. The teachers there aimed for three things: Gyan, which is knowledge, Pragya, or wisdom, and Satya, which is truth. Reviving this multidisciplinary spirit gives modern students the depth of thought they need to lead in a complex global economy. Of course, being a brilliant thinker is only half the battle. Technology is only useful if it is guided by a strong sense of right and wrong. This is why the policy anchors character building directly to the values found in the Indian Constitution. Students will spend time practicing equality, empathy for others, and respect for the many different ways of life that make our country whole. By combining national pride with modern critical thinking, we prepare students to be responsible citizens who can contribute to the entire world. To make this work, the policy focuses on the people at the heart of the classroom. It aims to give teachers better training and support to reestablish them as the most respected members of our society. And it brings everyone in. This update ensures children from historically disadvantaged groups have access to the exact same high-quality schooling. New scholarships and special education zones dissolve the physical and social barriers that kept these children from succeeding. Under this new policy, education serves as the ultimate equalizer, ensuring no child's potential is ever limited by the circumstances of their birth. You're looking at the most rapid period of construction a human being will ever experience. Millions of neural connections are forming every second. This chart tracks the velocity of human brain development over a lifetime. Notice the massive exponential spike right here at the beginning. Over 85% of a child's cumulative brain development happens before they even reach the age of 6. During this narrow window, the brain is highly plastic. It's absorbing its environment like a sponge, wiring the exact neural pathways that will dictate a person's future cognitive capacity, their emotional resilience, and their ability to socialize. Yet for decades, traditional schooling structures have largely ignored these crucial years. In the standard 10+2 education model, formal schooling simply doesn't begin until a child enters grade 1, around age 6. By waiting until age 6 to intervene, we are entirely missing the period of peak cognitive growth. An educational system that starts after the brain is mostly formed is starting the race late. Right now, millions of young children in India, particularly those from socioeconomically disadvantaged families, do not have access to quality early childhood care. Look at this graph comparing learning trajectories. The top line represents a child with early childhood education, showing a sharp upward curve in cognitive readiness from age 3. Without early stimulation, the second trajectory flattens. By grade 1, a massive readiness gap has formed. India's National Education Policy 2020 is designed to target this exact vulnerability. By restructuring the school system into a new 5+3+3+4 design, the policy brings ages 3 through 6 directly into the formal education fold. Getting every child into a stimulating learning environment before age 6 ensures that a student's starting point in life isn't dictated by their economic background. Universal early childhood education acts as the great leveler. To guide this shift, the government is introducing the National Curricular and Pedagogical Framework for Early Childhood Care and Education. This new framework breaks the developmental timeline into 2 distinct pillars: a specialized sub-framework for infants and toddlers ages 0 to 3, and a second for children ages 3 to 8. The policy explicitly moves away from rote memorization. Instead, it mandates flexible, play-based, and inquiry-driven learning, where a child learns spatial reasoning by stacking building blocks rather than copying numbers off a chalkboard. The curriculum intertwines alphabets and counting with drawing, puzzles, and group activities. It also weaves in behavioral lessons like teamwork, courtesy, and personal cleanliness. At this stage of life, the goal isn't to stockpile facts. The goal is to build the cognitive machinery itself, teaching the young brain how to inquire, how to interact, and how to learn. To ensure a smooth transition into primary school, the policy introduces the Balavatika, or preparatory class. Prior to the age of 5, every child will enter this specific grade before moving on to Class 1. These classes will be guided by specialized ECCE qualified teachers who use play-based methods to develop both psychomotor abilities and early literacy. But cognitive exercises only go so far if a child is hungry or unwell. This process flow shows how the Balavatika operates, combining trained educators, a play curriculum, midday meals, and health monitoring, resulting in a school-ready student. These vital health checkups and growth monitoring protocols are directly adapted from successful practices already established in India's existing Anganwadi centers. You cannot decouple the mind from the body. Preparing a child for formal education requires treating their physical health and cognitive stimulation as a single, unified requirement. Executing a curriculum of this magnitude requires a massive logistical mobilization. Millions of existing Anganwadi workers, currently operating these early childhood centers, need to be trained in the new pedagogy. To get everyone up to speed, the government is rolling out a 2-tiered training pathway. Workers with high school qualifications will complete a 6-month certificate program, while those with lower educational backgrounds will undertake a comprehensive 1-year diploma. To prevent any disruption to the care children are currently receiving, these certification programs will be delivered digitally through direct-to-home television channels and smartphones. The entire biological and pedagogical framework outlined in this policy rests squarely on the shoulders of these frontline educators. If they are supported, the system works. Managing this rollout is a deeply complex, collaborative effort. It requires synchronized planning between the Ministries of Human Resource Development, Women and Child Development, Health, and Tribal Affairs. They are working against a strict national deadline. The policy mandates that universal access to high-quality early childhood education must be achieved across the entire country by the year 2030. The metric for success is clear: a 100% success rate in ensuring every single child stepping into grade 1 is equipped with foundational literacy, numeracy, and social skills, no matter where they were born. By aligning its educational infrastructure with the biological reality of how human brains develop, India is cementing a foundation that will maximize the talents of its next generation. The core building blocks of education are simple: reading basic text, writing coherent sentences, and simple arithmetic. If a child misses these early concepts, the curriculum falls apart. Subjects like coding, literature, or advanced science rely entirely on this foundational comprehension. Universal mastery of literacy and numeracy serves as the non-negotiable floor for the entire educational system. But the current reality in many of India's classrooms paints a concerning picture. This chart shows a severe learning deficit. Right now, over 5 crore or 50 million elementary students in the country lack the ability to read basic text or carry out simple arithmetic. Millions of children are advancing through the grades without the ability to process the material placed in front of them. They are effectively locked out of meaningful learning well before they reach middle school. India's latest national education policy outlines ambitious reforms, but if this massive deficit remains unaddressed, those higher-level initiatives will fail at the starting line. To address this gap, the government has established the National Mission on Foundational Literacy and Numeracy. Operating in mission mode, the plan achieves universal foundational learning by 2025. It prioritizes educators teaching in students' home languages, capping the pupil-teacher ratio under 30:1 globally and 25:1 in disadvantaged areas. Empowering these educators, distributing them where they are needed most, and reducing their class sizes forms the primary defense in executing this 2025 objective. Looking at early childhood care, data shows a large proportion of students fall behind within the first few weeks of grade 1 due to a lack of preschool access. The solution is to mandate an interim 3-month play-based school preparation module. This block focuses on the sounds, shapes, and colors children need before the standard grade 1 curriculum even begins. The policy outlines a significant expansion of public and school libraries, driven by a national book promotion policy, ensuring high-quality reading material is widely accessible. The academic strategy also incorporates a technological backbone, utilizing the National Diksha digital platform to host a repository of high-quality learning resources for both teachers and students. This combination of specialized early schooling and digital resource support provides the structure required to bridge the 50 million student gap. But academic tools require a physically capable student to use them. A malnourished or unwell child cannot sustain the focus needed for cognitively demanding subjects like math and reading. To address this physiological reality, schools are introducing a nutritious, energizing morning breakfast to supplement existing midday meals, paired with regular, comprehensive health checkups. The plan also stretches beyond the schoolyard, integrating trained social workers, deploying local community volunteers, and utilizing peer-to-peer tutoring to keep learners engaged. True educational reform requires an interconnected ecosystem. You have to support the child's mind, their physical health, and their surrounding community simultaneously. When you view the blueprints as a whole, the strategy becomes clear. Teachers, tailored curriculum, nutritional health, and community initiatives converge to solve a single critical problem. Mastering the ability to read a sentence and complete basic arithmetic provides the only viable pathway for India to achieve its broader technological and economic aspirations in the 21st century. Success by 2025 determines the nation's trajectory. These foundational skills allow 50 million children to actually participate in a complex economy, moving the country's high-level aspirations from policy to reality. Over the last few decades, India has made massive strides in getting young children into classrooms, achieving near universal enrollment at the elementary school level. Look at this chart tracking the gross enrollment ratio. For grades 6 through 8, we maintain a strong baseline of nearly 91%. Watch what happens as those students move toward graduation. By grades 11 and 12, that line plummets to just 56.5%. Getting kids into a primary school building is only half the battle. If almost half of them vanish before their final exams, the pipeline itself is broken. We lack the mechanisms to actually keep them there. That percentage drop represents real people. Right now, an estimated 3.22 crore, or over 32 million children between the ages of 6 and 17, are entirely outside the formal schooling system. Having tens of millions of youth disconnected from formal education leaves a massive portion of the population without the skills needed to navigate a rapidly modernizing economy. Reversing this specific trend is a primary target of the National Education Policy 2020. The mandate is clear. Pull that secondary enrollment rate up and achieve a 100% gross enrollment ratio from preschool all the way through grade 12 by the year 2030. To capture everyone, the system has to adapt. The government is moving away from a rigid, single-track pipeline to build a flexible, multi-pathway safety net designed to catch every type of student. The first intervention tackles physical barriers. The policy outlines a massive expansion of existing school infrastructure, ensuring students have safe, functional places to learn. But a new building doesn't help if you can't reach it. For students living in remote or geographically isolated areas, the plan mandates the provision of safe, practical transportation to bridge that distance. In situations where the daily commute is impossible, the state will construct free, secure boarding facilities. This targeted effort keeps female students and those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds from dropping out simply because the journey to class is too difficult. We will also see the expansion of proven, high-quality institutional models, like the Kendriya Vidyalayas, specifically placed in aspirational and under-resourced districts. Before we even talk about curriculum or grading, the baseline requirements of physical access and student safety have to be guaranteed. Once the physical hardware is in place, the policy introduces the soft infrastructure, the human network tasked with keeping students actively engaged. Schools will now directly integrate trained counselors and qualified social workers into their daily operations. Instead of waiting for a desk to sit empty for a month, these professionals will closely monitor daily attendance and learning levels, looking for the early warning signs that a student might be slipping away. When a student flags as at risk, these social workers will travel directly into the local communities, sit down with the parents, and help solve the specific life circumstances pulling that child away from their education. The state is proactively hunting for vulnerable youth to repair their connection to the classroom before they disappear from the system. Yet, even with upgraded facilities and dedicated social workers, a traditional physical classroom schedule simply will not work for every demographic, like the children of migrant laborers who move frequently. To ensure these students aren't left behind, open and distance learning programs are being formalized as a completely legitimate parallel educational pathway. Institutions like the National Institute of Open Schooling, or NIOS, along with state open schools, are taking center stage. These platforms are being heavily expanded to offer equivalent certifications for grades 3, 5, 8, 10, and 12. They will also provide critical vocational training and adult literacy courses. By redefining school as a flexible network of pathways rather than a single physical building, the system can finally accommodate the complex realities of India's out-of-school youth. To make all of this happen, the government is loosening restrictive input regulations, opening the door for public philanthropic partnerships and deep community integration. The policy actively calls for the mobilization of healthy senior citizens, successful alumni, and literate community members to step in and offer one-on-one tutoring and career mentoring. Plugging a leak of this magnitude requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. The local community has to share the burden of student retention right alongside the government. Upgraded physical infrastructure, proactive social tracking, flexible alternative learning paths. These three interventions form the engine designed to pull that 56.5% secondary retention rate all the way to 100% by 2030. An education system achieves success when its structure guarantees that every student entering the pipeline actually makes it to the finish line a decade later. India will soon have the world's largest population of young people, but the system tasked with educating them is currently facing a bottleneck. Government surveys indicate that over 50 million students in elementary school have not yet attained foundational literacy or the ability to perform basic addition and subtraction. This commitment to universal quality education was formalized at the United Nations in 2015. To meet the critical targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the entire education system must be reconfigured to support actual learning rather than just classroom attendance. The shift is driven by a changing global landscape. In an economy increasingly defined by big data and artificial intelligence, memorized facts have a short shelf life. Success now depends on the ability to think critically, innovate, and adapt to fields across the sciences and humanities that are still emerging. Closing the gap between these new requirements and the current state of learning is the primary goal of the National Education Policy 2020. This is the first education policy of the 21st century, and it proposes a complete revamping of the education structure to prevent an entire generation from falling behind. The educational ecosystem connects 4 elements: the learner, teacher, curriculum, and assessment. For decades, these connections were rigid. High-stakes exams and an overloaded syllabus placed a massive burden on the learner, leaving teachers with little autonomy. Chapter 4 of the NEP aims to dissolve these rigid barriers, reweaving the connections to focus entirely on the holistic development of the student. The first major change is the removal of the traditional 10+2 academic structure. It is replaced by a 5+3+3+4 design. This new scaffolding is mapped to the actual cognitive development stages of children from age 3 up to age 18. By including ages 3 to 6 in the formal foundational stage, the policy integrates play-based early childhood care and education. This ensures children are school-ready before they ever enter grade 1. The timeline ends with a 4-year secondary stage, which is designed for multidisciplinary study. Here, students are given the flexibility to choose their own subjects based on their individual interests and life aspirations. While the timeline provides the structure, the internal changes to the curriculum are what redefine the student's daily experience. The policy removes the walls between arts and sciences and between academic and vocational streams. Vocational crafts like carpentry and electric work are no longer separate tracks, but a standard part of the learning experience for everyone. This is achieved through experiential learning. In the middle stage, every student will participate in a 10-day bagless period to intern with local experts in crafts, gardening, or the arts, turning abstract concepts into hands-on skills. To ensure complex ideas are grasped quickly, the policy utilizes the power of language. Wherever possible, the medium of instruction until at least grade 5 will be the student's home language or mother tongue. The curriculum also roots students in their own culture. Classical languages like Sanskrit, Tamil, and Malayalam are offered as options, giving students access to ancient works on mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. These ruins of ancient world-class institutions like Nalanda serve as the historical model for this approach. They once set global standards by teaching diverse subjects to students from across the world. By reducing core content to make space for critical thinking, the new curriculum becomes a customizable pathway designed to reveal the unique talents of each learner. The assessment node is also being rewired to end the current coaching culture. For too long, high-stakes exams have forced students to learn a narrow band of material through rote memorization. This chart represents the shift to a 360-degree holistic progress card. Instead of a single grade, it tracks a learner's growth across cognitive, social, and emotional domains using a mix of teacher, peer, and self-assessments. To manage this transition, a new body called PARAKH is being established. Its goal is to set new standards that prioritize the evaluation of analysis, critical thinking, and conceptual clarity over memorized facts. Board exams are also becoming lower stakes. They will now test core competencies, allowing up to 2 attempts yearly, removing the immense pressure of a single make-or-break test. Assessment is now a continuous diagnostic tool, meant to help the teacher and student optimize the learning process as it happens. With these changes, the character web reaches a state of balance. The learner is the central hub, supported by a flexible curriculum, formative assessment, and empowered teachers who have the autonomy to choose their own pedagogy. The goal is to develop citizens capable of rational thought and action, possessing the compassion and ethics required to build an inclusive society. It is a framework that aligns India's ancient traditions of knowledge with the specialized demands of a modern economy driven by mathematics and the sciences. Chapter 4 of the NEP 2020 aims to replace a system of memorization with one rooted in Indian ethos and global quality. By providing a high-quality education to all, the policy seeks to transform India into a society where knowledge is the primary tool for social and economic mobility. In ancient Indian traditions, the guru was the most respected member of society, provided with everything required to pass down knowledge optimally. The National Education Policy 2020 applies that philosophy to the modern era, setting out a systemic approach to restore the status and dignity of the teacher. To achieve this, the policy maps an ecosystem of 4 roles: the teacher at the core, the learner, the master instructor, and the school complex management committee. Local experts bring specific knowledge to assist the teacher, while the committee provides essential operational support. The NEP 2020 transforms the standard list of employment rules into an entirely redesigned ecosystem built specifically to empower the teacher to shape the nation's future. Building that ecosystem begins before the teacher even enters the classroom. To attract outstanding students to the profession, the policy institutes merit-based scholarships for a 4-year integrated B.Ed program, specifically targeting top talent from rural areas. Once trained, educators require stability. The system incentivizes rural deployment by providing local housing on or near school premises, and it enforces a strict halt on excessive, disruptive teacher transfers. The standard for entry is also elevated. Hiring now requires passing a strengthened teacher eligibility test, followed by mandatory classroom demonstrations and interviews to prove proficiency in the local language. By combining rigorous entry standards with strong deployment incentives, the system ensures that students in marginalized and rural areas learn from highly qualified educators who speak their language and understand their community. Even the best educators cannot succeed in failing infrastructure. The policy mandates strict baseline requirements for every school, ensuring safe buildings, clean drinking water, and functional toilets for all genders. To solve the problem of geographic and professional isolation in small remote schools, the NEP establishes school complexes. A central secondary school shares libraries, science labs, and staff with smaller primary schools and Anganwadis within its radius. Within these complexes, teachers are removed from strenuous administrative tasks, including the daily logistics of managing midday meals. By grouping resources and stripping away the busy work, the system clears the schedule, giving teachers the time and the pedagogical freedom required to focus on their students' development. There is a common assumption in education that to advance your career or earn a higher salary, you must eventually transition from teaching early grades up to secondary school. The NEP explicitly rejects this. All teaching stages are treated with equal importance. An educator can earn tenure, promotions, and salary increases entirely within a single stage. Moving forward, promotions are determined by a new set of national professional standards for teachers, combined with a mandate to complete at least 50 hours of continuous professional development every year. So, does an outstanding early childhood teacher need to transfer to a high school to earn a promotion? No. By tying career growth to professional standards rather than simple seniority or grade level, the highest performing educators are rewarded for staying exactly where their specific expertise is most needed. By 2030, the qualification matrix streamlines. The minimum teaching requirement becomes a 4-year integrated B.Ed. Pivot pathways exist. Standard bachelor's holders qualify through a 2-year B.Ed, while those with a master's or 4-year multidisciplinary bachelor's complete their B.Ed in 1 year. The system also introduces highly specialized certification courses to train special educators. Simultaneously, substandard teacher education institutions that fail to meet these academic rigors will be shut down. From merit-based recruitment and collaborative school complexes to professional standards for promotion and a restructured B.Ed matrix, the NEP 2020 builds a complete modern life cycle. It ensures that those tasked with educating the next generation have the support, respect, and resources to do their best work. Education is universally understood to be the most reliable engine for social equity. When structured correctly, it creates a mechanical pathway for upward mobility, allowing individuals to transcend the circumstances of their birth. In India, policies aimed at universal primary enrollment have largely succeeded in getting children into classrooms. However, tracking that same demographic cohort through to graduation reveals a severe systemic failure at the secondary level. This chart visualizes that failure. Among scheduled caste students, primary enrollment sits at 19.6%, but collapses to 17.3% by higher secondary. For differently able children, participation drops from 1.1% to just 0.25%. This data tells us that student attrition in India is not a uniform occurrence. The system loses students at highly predictable rates, depending entirely on their demographic background. The current educational pipeline functions as an unintentional filter. It actively removes historically underrepresented groups long before they can reach graduation and enter the skilled workforce. To address this, The National Education Policy 2020 establishes a precise demographic target, grouped under the nomenclature Socioeconomically Disadvantaged Groups, or SEDGs. Chapter 6 of the NEP outlines the strategy for these groups. It rejects the historical reliance on isolated Band-Aid programs, like a single scholarship scheme or a temporary enrollment drive. Instead, Chapter 6 presents an engineered blueprint. It is a structural redesign intended to mechanically halt demographic attrition. This blueprint operates through three primary mechanisms: spatial resource targeting, targeted financial routing, and micro-level classroom engineering. Because the barriers keeping students out of school are complex and intersecting, only a synchronized, systemic response can actually plug the leaks in the educational pipeline. This tree diagram maps the SEDG acronym into its 5 constituent roots of systemic disadvantage: gender, sociocultural identities, geographical locations, disabilities, and socioeconomic conditions. The gender branch explicitly includes female and transgender individuals. The sociocultural branch accounts for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and minority populations. The remaining branches cover geographical identities, like students in remote villages or aspirational districts, disabilities, which include specific learning disabilities, and socioeconomic conditions, targeting migrant communities, orphans, and the urban poor. The policy acknowledges that these identities compound. A student rarely faces just one barrier. Women and girls cut across all of these underrepresented groups, meaning the exclusion they face is mathematically amplified. Consequently, providing high-quality education to girls is identified as the single most effective, multi-generational intervention for uplifting the entire SEDG matrix. A successful policy must map directly to this overlapping reality, rather than treating disadvantage as a single uniform variable. With the demographic targets defined, the NEP deploys macro-level interventions, beginning with geographical resource targeting. This map illustrates the concept of special education zones, or SEZs. Data shows that certain regions contain significantly larger proportions of disadvantaged groups. SEZs are designed to concentrate physical resources and maximize policy implementation exactly in those high-density areas. Running parallel to these physical zones is a fiscal mechanism, the Gender Inclusion Fund. This fund allows states to deploy highly context-specific interventions. If distance is the barrier, the fund provides bicycles. If hygiene is keeping girls at home, it builds sanitation facilities. If the barrier is economic, it issues targeted cash transfers. Similar, targeted inclusion funds are mandated to be developed to address the specific access barriers for the other demographic categories. Spatial targeting ensures infrastructure is built where it is mathematically needed. Financial targeting ensures local, day-to-day barriers to access are actively bypassed. Even with financial assistance, physical distance and safety concerns cause massive drop-offs, particularly for female students in rural areas. The policy addresses this through an expansion of physical infrastructure. The NEP mandates building new free boarding facilities that match the standard of the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, while strengthening existing Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas. These boarding facilities are strategically placed in aspirational districts to guarantee safe, high-quality access for girls from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. For students whose circumstances prevent them from attending formal physical schools entirely, the policy relies on alternative formats and open and distance learning. Programs under the National Institute of Open Schooling will be expanded to offer equivalents to grades 3, 5, and 8, as well as secondary and vocational education. Furthermore, existing alternative schools will receive direct financial assistance to integrate subjects like science, mathematics, and local languages, bringing their curriculum up to national standard outcomes. By expanding boarding and remote learning options, the system catches students who would otherwise be forced out by rigid formal structures or geography. Looking at the physiological identities within the SEDG matrix, the focus shifts to micro-level classroom engineering for children with special needs. The NEP enforces strict legal and operational alignment with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. Achieving full classroom inclusion requires mechanical adjustments. Schools must ensure barrier-free physical access, provide appropriate assistive technologies, and supply teaching materials in accessible formats like large print and Braille. To support this, the policy mandates recruiting special educators with cross-disability training directly into standard school complexes, allowing students to integrate into regular classrooms. For students with severe or profound disabilities, home-based education remains a choice, backed by formalized standards and an auditing process to ensure equity and quality of opportunity. The policy also addresses specific learning disabilities. Through the new National Assessment Center, PARAKH, schools will utilize early identification, flexible curricula, and tailored assessment protocols that leverage a child's strengths. True inclusion means adapting the physical and pedagogical system to the diverse needs of the student, rather than forcing the student to adapt to a rigid system. If we map these individual mechanisms together, we see the entire policy blueprint functioning as a single, cohesive ecosystem. The inclusion funds act as the financial fuel, bypassing local barriers and enabling the physical build-out of boarding schools and infrastructure. That infrastructure acts as the host environment, housing necessary assistive technologies, customized pedagogy, and special educators. Every lever is engineered toward a single stated target, achieving a 100% gross enrollment ratio from preschool to secondary level by 2030. Removing any single layer of this matrix causes the pipeline to leak. It proves the necessity of a systemic approach over piecemeal programs. However, the structural mechanics of this policy cannot function in a vacuum. They require a specific human element to operate. The NEP mandates a baseline shift in school culture. Material on human values, tolerance, gender equality, and bias removal must be embedded into the curriculum. Teachers, administrators, and social workers will undergo continuous sensitization training, ensuring the day-to-day environment respects the privacy and dignity of every student. Chapter 6 demands that the structural and cultural architecture of the Indian school system finally mirrors the diverse demographic reality of the students it serves. Executing this blueprint is the necessary path to realizing the true purpose of education, serving as the primary engine for an equitable and just society. Governing an education system for over 1 billion people requires solving logistical equations at an unimaginable scale. Through the late 20th and early 21st centuries, India executed a massive infrastructure rollout, placing hundreds of thousands of learning points across highly challenging terrain. The primary engine behind this massive geographical footprint was the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, or SSA. The core mandate of the SSA was highly specific: guarantee a primary school in nearly every single habitation across the country, regardless of its remoteness. As a deployment strategy, it worked. The state achieved near-universal geographic access to primary education for Indian children. However, the physical reality of these new institutions was incredibly uniform. They were built as small-scale, highly isolated structures, intended to serve extremely localized rural populations. This created an access paradox. By solving the geographic problem, the state built a system vulnerable to severe structural hyperfragmentation. When an education system shatters into hundreds of thousands of microunits, specific operational symptoms begin surfacing. This UDICE data chart reveals a critical vulnerability. Nearly 28% of primary schools operate with fewer than 30 students. Consequently, over 100,000 schools are forced to operate with a single teacher managing every grade level. The immediate result is pedagogical degradation. Single-teacher microschools necessitate forced multi-grade teaching, severely limiting the depth of instruction any student can receive. It also creates systemic human resource starvation. At this microscale, it is mathematically impossible for the state to hire specialized instructors for art, music, or special education for every individual building. The physical infrastructure deficit follows the exact same logic. A government cannot justify placing high-cost assets, like dedicated science labs or extensive libraries, inside a building serving only a dozen students. Yet this creates a political deadlock. Shutting down or consolidating these underperforming schools is unviable because doing so destroys the localized rural access achieved over the last 3 decades. You are left with an administrative nightmare, a highly centralized department attempting to manage and supply hundreds of thousands of collapsing peripheral units. The Directorate cannot physically or financially sustain the system using this legacy centralized model. A structural rewiring is required. Chapter 7 of the National Education Policy 2020 targets the structural repair of this fragmented network without closing rural doors. The first step in this reorganization is identifying an existing, well-resourced secondary school within a given region. Once identified, the state draws a strict 5 to 10 kilometer radius around this central secondary hub. This boundary captures all the peripheral components, the lower-grade schools and preschool Anganwadis, operating within that specific geographical catchment area. These previously isolated units are then formally merged into a single administrative entity. The NEP calls this the school complex or cluster. This is a strict legal distinction. The cluster operates as a semi-autonomous unit rather than a loose affiliation of neighboring buildings. This spatial architecture successfully groups a critical mass of students and resources while leaving the physical school buildings exactly where they are, in their rural locations. This boundary integrates the solitary building into a larger geographical zone of shared capability. The immediate operational advantage of the school complex model is the newly enabled fluidity of resources. This network establishes a human capital sharing mechanism. Specialized instructors, like special educators, counselors, and vocational experts, can now rotate through the network, reaching students at multiple sites. Physical resource pooling works the same way. High-cost infrastructure located at the secondary school is legally made accessible to students enrolled at the microschools. The economic efficiency here is clear. The state eliminates the need to duplicate expensive lab equipment across 15 different microsites. For rural educators, the professional isolation ends. Single-grade teachers are integrated into larger collaborative teams across the complex. This network also shares vital administrative support, distributing technical maintenance staff and trained social workers throughout the cluster. This shift towards shared access enables the system to extract greater utility from its current personnel and infrastructure. Resolving physical resource bottlenecks requires an accompanying shift in administrative power dynamics. The legacy failure point was scale. District education officers simply could not micromanage thousands of isolated schools effectively. To solve this, the NEP introduces a new governance mechanism, the School Complex Management Committee, or SCMC. Under the old localized planning mechanism, individual school management committees generated siloed school development plans. The new requirement mandates that the SCMC fuses these disparate plans into a unified school complex development plan. This forces long-term strategic alignment. For 3 to 5 years, human resources, infrastructure, and financial planning are synchronized across the entire 10-kilometer radius. This allows the Directorate of School Education to delegate authority. They now interact with the complex as a single unit, empowering local leaders to make finer resource decisions on the ground. True decentralization and efficiency only occur when local clusters possess the legal autonomy to plan their own architecture. The networking principles outlined in Chapter 7 are designed to breach strictly public administrative boundaries as well. The policy outlines a twinning initiative, legally facilitating the pairing of a public school complex with a private school. The goal of twinning is to break institutional silos, allowing for the direct transfer of pedagogical best practices and shared resources between sectors. The policy also introduces a secondary layer of spatial and cultural expansion called bal bhavans. These function as dedicated regional daytime boarding centers, focusing on art, play, and career-related activities on weekends. Each initiative targets the same objective: aggressively dismantling the walls of isolated institutions to leverage the entire community's assets. The historical tension in Indian education has always been the necessity of placing a school in every remote habitation to guarantee access. The school complex model rectifies the economic and operational unviability of that massive expansion, and it does so without closing a single rural door. By linking these isolated rural points together, the new system transforms its greatest historic vulnerability into powerful administrative resilience. NEP 2020 Chapter 7 evolves the national standard. It moves the baseline from mere geographical access to equitable, high-quality access. The resilience of the system depends on the strength of these decentralized networks. To manage the education of millions of students, states have historically relied on a massive, highly centralized bureaucracy. At the top of this hierarchy sits the state's Department of School Education, or DSE. For decades, this single department served as the ultimate authority over every aspect of the schooling system. Friction occurs because the DSE has been forced to juggle three competing roles: writing the policies, running the schools, and regulating the entire system. The first role is policymaking, defining the overarching educational strategy. The second involves operations, day-to-day management of schools, hiring teachers, and distributing resources. Finally, regulation, assessing school quality, enforcing standards, and granting accreditation. Housing rulemaking, operations, and regulation under a single roof creates a structural barrier to objective self-assessment. In institutional governance, a conflict of interest occurs when an organization's internal goals interfere with its duty to act fairly and impartially. Because the Department of School Education was directly operating the public schools, its ability to act as an impartial regulator was compromised. Infrastructural gaps and stagnant learning outcomes in government schools were routinely overlooked. The governing body was effectively marking its own exam papers. Meanwhile, private educational institutions governed by that same authority often faced arbitrary regulatory hurdles and opaque licensing requirements that did not apply to state schools. This asymmetry built a fragmented system focused more on bureaucratic compliance than actual educational quality. Structural reform requires dismantling this concentrated power structure. To achieve quality, the entities running the schools cannot be the exact same entities assessing them. Chapter 8 of the National Education Policy 2020 directly addresses this flaw through a blueprint designed to dismantle the DSE's conflict of interest. The policy relies on a clear structural principle: the separation of functions. It breaks apart the legacy monolith and distributes its power into a decentralized framework built on 4 distinct, independent pillars. The first pillar is the State Department of Education. Moving forward, this body will focus exclusively on overarching policymaking. Removing operational distractions allows policymakers to dedicate their resources purely to long-term educational strategy. The remaining responsibilities, operations, academics, and regulation, are assigned to 3 separate independent bodies. This decentralization establishes specialized, focused institutions with built-in checks and balances. The second pillar takes the Directorate of School Education, strips it of its regulatory power, and assigns it solely to operations. Its mandate is now restricted to managing the public school system, improving infrastructure, delivering resources, and supporting teachers. The third pillar is the State Council of Educational Research and Training, or SCERT. This body takes ownership of the state's academics. They design the curriculum and build the pedagogical frameworks that dictate how students learn. Separating curriculum design from school management ensures that academic goals are not compromised by administrative or logistical burdens. With policy, operations, and academics defined, the system remains incomplete without an independent referee. By isolating operations and academics, the state has cleared the path for independent regulation. This brings us to the fourth pillar, the creation of a completely independent State School Standards Authority, or SSSA. The SSSA's operational independence from the DSE is designed to resolve the inherent conflict of interest. Its core function is to establish and enforce a minimal set of baseline standards across every school in the state. To enforce these standards, the SSSA will use a specific tool, the School Quality Assessment and Accreditation Framework, known as SQAAF. While the academic metrics of the SQAAF are developed by the SCERT, the actual enforcement of the framework belongs strictly to the SSSA. The framework measures specific parameters: basic safety protocols, infrastructural adequacy, appropriate student-to-teacher ratios, and financial probity. The SSSA and the SQAAF replace subjective internal reviews with a standardized, data-driven accreditation process. Historically, private schools faced complex licensing, while public schools were rarely held accountable for baseline failures. The NEP 2020 mandate establishes public-private parity under the new SSSA framework. The regulator will not discriminate based on ownership. The exact same SQAAF metric will be applied universally to both government and private schools. This unified approach ensures that educational quality means the same thing, regardless of who operates the institution. Private and philanthropic schools are encouraged to innovate and try alternative pedagogies, provided they meet the universal SQAAF baseline. Universal application of the SQAAF eliminates institutional double standards, placing the focus entirely on child safety and educational outcomes. This new system operates on the NEP 2020 regulatory philosophy known as light but tight. The framework is light because the SSSA will not micromanage day-to-day affairs, allowing schools autonomy to achieve their specific educational goals. It is tight because there is zero compromise on essential parameters like safety, infrastructure, and financial transparency. To enforce this philosophy without needing massive inspection armies, the policy relies on public disclosure. All schools must openly publish their SQAAF compliance data on a public website, allowing parents and stakeholders to verify the conditions themselves. The system relies on self-disclosure, backed by randomized audits from the SSSA to keep the reported data honest. NEP 2020 replaces an opaque, centralized monopoly with a distributed, transparent matrix, creating a government structure where quality is measurable, independent, and visible to all. The global knowledge economy is rapidly shifting. With the rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science, the future workforce requires an entirely new set of cognitive skills. India's legacy 10+2 education system is misaligned with this reality. It is optimized for processing students through rote memorization and rigid high-stakes testing, rather than cultivating analytical or critical thinking. The National Education Policy 2020 is a comprehensive mandate designed to dismantle that model. Its objective is to reconfigure the entire system to achieve inclusive, equitable education by 2030, aligning with the Global Sustainable Development Goal 4. The old 10+2 hierarchy is scrapped. In its place is a new pedagogical blueprint, a 5+3+3+4 design. These stages map directly to a child's cognitive development phases, providing a continuous learning trajectory from age 3 to 18. To support this pedagogical shift, the policy relies on a second major pillar, a massive infrastructural overhaul that de-silos isolated schools and links them into integrated school complexes. The NEP 2020 replaces administrative patches with a structural redesign for how a nation of over 1 billion people learns. In the foundational stage, spanning ages 3 to 8, an estimated 5 crore students currently lack basic literacy and numeracy. To counter this, the government's national mission sets a hard target: attain universal foundational literacy for every student by grade 3, ending by 2025. The legacy system failed these children by beginning formal instruction only at age 6, ignoring the early years when over 85% of cumulative brain development occurs. The NEP fixes this by formally integrating 3 years of early childhood care and education, or ECCE, incorporating Anganwadis and Balavatika well before Class 1. This utilizes India's vast network of Anganwadi centers, transforming them into foundational learning hubs staffed by trained educators. Pedagogy at this stage abandons heavy textbooks. Instruction relies on multifaceted, play-based, and inquiry-driven learning. To bridge any remaining gaps, all incoming Class 1 students undergo an interim 3-month school preparation module to ensure they enter formal schooling with equal cognitive readiness. Without securing this cognitive bedrock by age 8, the mathematics of the learning curve dictate that subsequent educational interventions and advanced curricula will fail. Moving up the grid, we reach the preparatory and middle stages, spanning ages 8 to 14. Here, the curriculum shifts from foundational play into cognitive expansion. This stage enforces a specific language policy. The medium of instruction must be the student's mother tongue or local language until at least grade 5, and preferably up to grade 8. Cognitive science drives this mandate. Young brains absorb non-trivial, abstract concepts significantly faster when the information is processed in their native language. The framework also dismantles rigid academic silos, requiring multidisciplinary exposure and eliminating hard separations between the arts, sciences, and humanities. Physical vocational exposure is legally integrated into the curriculum. Students in grades 6 through 8 will participate in a mandatory 10-day bag list period. During this time, they intern with local vocational experts. A student might learn the physics of rotational force from a master potter. Alternatively, they can acquire the geometric and mechanical skills necessary for trades like carpentry or metalwork. Alongside these physical, practice-based crafts, the middle tier introduces high-level computational thinking, mathematics, and early coding. This phase shifts the learner from a passive receiver of rote facts into an active, multidisciplinary creator, rooted in the realities of their local context. The final 4-year block is the secondary stage. Here, the framework directly targets the ultimate bottleneck of the old model, the high-stakes board exams. The previous assessment system spawned a coaching culture. It forced students to memorize narrow material to pass a single test, crowding out genuine comprehension. The policy executes a reversal. Board exams are redesigned to test core capacities and critical thinking. To lower the stakes, students are granted multiple attempts per year. Look at this radar chart. It visualizes the new holistic, multidimensional progress card, replacing the rigid report card. It aggregates data from multiple vectors, combining self-assessment, peer reviews, and project outcomes alongside standard teacher evaluations. To monitor and guide these competency-based outcomes across all school boards, the government established PARAKH, a new national standard-setting body. At the next tier, the National Testing Agency scales this by offering high-quality, common aptitude tests, reducing the administrative burden on universities. By removing the high-stakes summative bottleneck, PARAKH forces the entire educational ecosystem to reward true competency over temporary memorization. Stepping back from the individual student, the macro infrastructure faces a geographic challenge: the proliferation of highly isolated, very small schools. Equipping tens of thousands of single-teacher schools, often with fewer than 30 students, with science labs, dedicated libraries, and specialist educators, is an economic impossibility. This extreme isolation damages teacher morale, prevents collaborative learning, and suppresses overall student outcomes. The fix for this is the mandatory clustering of isolated schools into school complexes. Under this model, one secondary school is linked with all neighboring lower schools and anganwadis within a 5 to 10 kilometer radius. These networks operate as semi-autonomous units, sharing specialized teachers, social workers, and lab equipment across the cluster. This clustered architecture allows the state to designate special education zones, channeling targeted resources to socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. The school complex model replaces isolated nodes with an integrated, resilient mesh network designed for efficiency. Zooming out, the fully compiled blueprint is clear. The cognitively aligned 5+3+3+4 pedagogy maps onto the infrastructural mesh network, all monitored by PARAKH. This creates a light but tight regulatory framework. It mandates standard outcomes while preserving wide latitude for local innovation and flexibility. This structural modernization draws on India's heritage of multidisciplinary excellence and holistic learning. It aspires to resurrect the historical precedents of world-class ancient institutions like Nalanda and Taxila, engineering those models for the modern age. By 2040, the successful deployment of this blueprint would move the world's largest youth cohort from a legacy of rote repetition into a workforce capable of leading a high-tech, multidisciplinary economy. The National Education Policy 2020 reconfigures the entire Indian schooling structure, shifting everything from regulatory governance to the basic developmental timeline for students. For decades, the standard 10+2 system created a structural blind spot. By beginning formal schooling at age 6, it left the crucial developmental window from ages 3 to 6 entirely outside the formal pipeline. The scientific reality exposes the cost of this delay. Over 85% of a child's cumulative brain development occurs before age 6. Under the old system, many students entered grade 1 having already missed this vital cognitive window. While previous policies like the Right to Education Act successfully secured legal access for millions, they operated within this same framework. They brought children into schools but inherited a start line years behind the brain's peak development. Expansion alone cannot solve a learning crisis if the start line remains disconnected from neurodevelopment. That historical push for universal access succeeded geographically, placing a primary school in nearly every habitation. However, this rapid growth created severe institutional fragmentation. The result is a landscape of thousands of suboptimal schools. Today, nearly 28% of India's public primary schools operate with fewer than 30 students across all 8 elementary grades. In these isolated, often single-teacher schools, delivering a modern curriculum is practically impossible. One teacher cannot realistically provide high-quality instruction in mathematics, the arts, and sports simultaneously. To address this, the NEP executes 2 parallel shifts. It replaces the 10+2 pedagogy while simultaneously consolidating fragmented institutions into larger, shared clusters. To move past the era of isolated outposts and change how students learn, the system must change how schools are governed, funded, and staffed. This is the 5-3-3-4 blueprint, mapped to the cognitive developmental stages of a child. The first stage, the 5-year foundational block, integrates Anganwadis and preschools into the primary continuum, merging 3 years of early childhood care into the first 2 years of primary school. This stage prioritizes early childhood care and education, or ECCE. It replaces traditional rote learning with a framework built on play, discovery, and inquiry-based activities. This early intervention is the engine for a new national mission: universal foundational literacy and numeracy. The system now targets a clear deadline of 2025 for every student to reach these milestones by grade 3. For students entering grade 1 without prior preschool access, the policy introduces an interim 3-month school preparation module. This ensures all learners are ready for formal schooling, regardless of their starting point. By institutionalizing schooling from age 3, the foundational block aims to resolve the learning crisis at its source before the developmental gap can widen. Following the foundational years, the preparatory and middle stages introduce specialized subject teachers. These stages transition students from activity-based play to discussing abstract concepts in the sciences and humanities. Experiential learning becomes the standard here. Mathematical thinking and coding are integrated into the middle stage curriculum, using puzzles and games to encourage computational reasoning. During these years, students participate in a 10-day bagless period. They intern with local vocational experts, such as carpenters, gardeners, or artists, to gain hands-on experience and build respect for vocational crafts. The final 4 years form the secondary stage. This period is defined by multidisciplinary flexibility, giving students the autonomy to choose their own subjects and design their own learning trajectories. The policy removes the hard separations between arts, sciences, and vocational streams. This integrated approach mirrors the multidisciplinary standards of ancient Indian institutions like Takshashila and Nalanda, where knowledge was treated as a unified whole. This structural flexibility develops adaptable, critical thinkers who can navigate a changing economic landscape rather than specialists trained for a single narrow field. It is physically impossible for a single primary school to provide the labs, libraries, and specialized teachers this curriculum requires. Therefore, the policy mandates school complexes, grouping one secondary school with nearby primary schools. Shared resources at the secondary hub now serve the entire cluster. Governance also becomes localized. Authority is devolved to a school complex management committee, allowing the cluster to act as a semi-autonomous unit that plans its own human and physical resource needs. These complexes aim to turn fragmented outposts into resource-efficient ecosystems. They provide the physical and administrative foundation necessary to deliver the NEP's pedagogical goals. A shift in curriculum requires a shift in evaluation. The current reliance on high-stakes board exams has fueled a coaching culture that often prioritizes exam preparation over actual competency. A new National Assessment Center, PARAKH, will now guide boards toward formative tracking. The goal is a 360-degree progress card that measures a student's cognitive, emotional, and psychomotor development through regular, competency-based feedback. This multidimensional tracking is a tool for retention. It helps teachers identify and support students from socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, or SEDGs, before they fall behind or drop out. For geographic areas with high concentrations of these students, the policy designates special education zones. These regions will receive concentrated resource allocation and targeted implementation of all scholarship and support schemes. Further capacity is built through the Gender Inclusion Fund. This financial mechanism is designed to specifically assist female and transgender students, funding everything from safe sanitation to community-based access initiatives. By embedding these funds and zones directly into the policy framework, the system attempts to make equity a functional requirement of school governance rather than an external addition. The 5-3-3-4 pedagogical stages and the physical school complex model are designed to work as a single integrated mechanism. This architecture aims to harmonize modern educational delivery with the multidisciplinary traditions of India's heritage, focusing on the complete realization of the student's potential. By closing the gap in early childhood care and eliminating the silos between vocational and academic paths, the policy creates a continuous developmental pipeline from age 3 to 18. Through these targeted funds and localized clusters, the blueprint aims to decouple a student's academic potential from their geographic or social background, building the skilled workforce required for India's global ascent. We are living through an era of extreme acceleration. Between the explosion of artificial intelligence, the sheer volume of big data, and with the rapidly escalating pressures of global climate change, our entire global landscape is shifting by the minute. Yet, for decades, we've prepared students for this unpredictable reality by sorting them into isolated silos: arts, science, commerce, and vocational streams. A workforce trained for one specific routine task is fragile. Automated algorithms easily replicate and replace those isolated processes. Modern crises, like managing pandemics or securing clean water, cannot be solved by physics alone. They require an intersection of biology, social sciences, and humanities. The National Education Policy 2020 addresses this vulnerability. It pivots the system away from rote memorization, focusing instead on teaching students how to innovate and learn how to learn. This multidisciplinary approach revives the holistic educational philosophies built over millennia in ancient India. World-class institutions like Takshila and Nalanda operated on these principles, setting global standards for teaching and research across academic borders. The scholars who emerged from these systems were polymaths. They drove simultaneous advancements across diverse fields, from breakthroughs in mathematics and early medicine to civil engineering and monumental architecture. To survive the automation wave and solve complex ecological crises, modern education must abandon its isolated categories. The future requires a deeply interconnected model of learning. The change starts with the physical timeline. The NEP replaces the rigid 10+2 linear structure with a 5+3+3+4 architecture. Within this new timeline, the traditional walls between curricular and extracurricular activities and the divides between arts and sciences dissolve. To bridge the spaces between subjects, the curriculum relies on experiential learning. Students engage in hands-on discovery that spans multiple disciplines. Teachers will use art integration to weave local culture and storytelling into the classroom, using them as a foundation to explain complex academic concepts. Similarly, sports integration applies physical activity and indigenous games to academics. This builds collaboration and cognitive focus alongside physical fitness. When students reach the middle stage, grades 6 through 8, the curriculum integrates vocational skills directly into mainstream education. This includes a mandatory 10-day bagless period. For almost 2 weeks, students leave their textbooks behind and intern with local experts. They get immediate exposure to practical trades. They learn carpentry, electric work, or traditional pottery directly from the professionals who do it every day. By the time students hit the secondary stage, they are given the autonomy to choose their own subjects and design their own multidisciplinary trajectories. The 5+3+3+4 blueprint transforms school from a series of rigid hurdles into a customizable web. It aligns a student's individual interests with the complexities of the real world. This structural shift from silos to integrated stages is designed to foster the holistic development of every learner. In a multidisciplinary system, building character and ethics carries the same weight as building cognitive ability. This approach is engineered to produce students equipped with a scientific temper, fluency in multiple languages, and digital literacy. The policy also prioritizes a comprehensive knowledge of India. By understanding their own heritage, students gain the cultural pride necessary to anchor them in a global society. To give this system room to breathe, the policy reforms the pressure of traditional board exams. Assessments now test core competencies, reducing the reliance on narrow, high-stress coaching. By combining ancient traditions with modern vocational skills, the NEP 2020 provides a pathway for students to navigate a changing global landscape. It offers the next generation the specific tools required to master the systems of the future. For decades, the prevailing logic in educational policy was simple: build a room, put a desk inside, and call it a school. Initiatives like the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan were highly effective at driving universal enrollment. They successfully got millions of students through the door. But treating physical proximity as the sole metric for success overlooked a massive variable. A desk doesn't teach you if the environment around it is broken. In many regions, the drive for access outpaced the deployment of actual learning infrastructure, leaving students in spaces that were technically schools on paper but severely lacking in practice. The National Education Policy 2020 pivots entirely away from this metric. It abandons the idea of passive access in favor of engineering an optimal learning environment. Achieving holistic education, or samagra shiksha, demands a fully integrated ecosystem. It requires looking far beyond the four walls of an isolated classroom. To actually educate the next generation, we have to deconstruct the current model and rebuild the entire architecture of student support, starting from the literal floorboards and scaling all the way up to the district level. Physical safety and physiological health are the non-negotiable prerequisites for learning. A student cannot focus on a lesson while managing basic hygiene or safety concerns. This flowchart illustrates Section 5.9 of the NEP, which lays out strict infrastructure mandates for every microenvironment. This requires securing clean drinking water, functional toilets, and safe physical spaces before introducing computing devices in libraries. But establishing baseline safety falls short if that space physically excludes parts of the student population. The policy explicitly mandates barrier-free access for Divyang, or children with disabilities, aligning school infrastructure directly with the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act of 2016. This requirement extends past installing wheelchair ramps and wider doors. A truly barrier-free environment must supply accessible learning tools, like textbooks printed in Braille and large print formats. And for students with severe or profound disabilities who cannot physically commute, the environment must adapt to them, providing heavily supported home-based education options. The microenvironment has to completely eliminate physical and systemic barriers. Only then is the stage set for actual learning. Once the building is functional, the next challenge is getting marginalized students there and keeping them there. This requires active intervention for socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, or SEDGs. The data shows a stark reality. Overall enrollment steadily declines from grade 1 to 12, but that dropout friction is severely compounded for female and transgender students within these groups. To combat this attrition, the Datalint is establishing a dedicated Gender Inclusion Fund. This fund deploys highly localized resources to eliminate very specific points of friction. For a female student in a rural landscape, the difference between dropping out and graduating is often as simple as a bicycle to safely cover the miles between home and the classroom. Zooming out from individual transport, the policy targets macro-geographic disparities by establishing special education zones. These zones are designated regions with high SEDG populations where the government will flood the area with maximum scheme implementation to rapidly alter the educational landscape. For students traveling from vast distances, the policy also mandates building free boarding facilities that match the high standards of Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas. Building an optimal environment requires disproportionate, targeted resource allocation to dismantle the deep-rooted socio-cultural barriers to entry. But physical infrastructure and targeted funding have zero impact without specialized human capital to deploy them. To properly support children with special needs, this organizational structure mandates the integration of specialized educators directly into the standard schooling process. These cannot be generalists. The policy requires special educators to possess cross-disability training to accurately identify and mitigate specific learning disabilities early on. Addressing the broader dropout crisis also means expanding the staff to include trained social workers and dedicated counselors. Their role extends well past academic advising. They are tasked with moving beyond academics to monitor student mental health, track cases of malnutrition, and drive community engagement to ensure students remain anchored to the school system. This support also targets physiology directly. Recognizing the cognitive demand of rigorous study, the policy recommends adding a simple, energizing breakfast to the existing midday meal program. A school cannot operate at its peak unless its human capital is actively monitoring and addressing the holistic psychological and physiological needs of the student. This brings us to a massive structural bottleneck. The historical push for universal access created thousands of highly isolated, economically inefficient, single-teacher schools. According to UDICE data, nearly 28% of India's public primary schools operate with fewer than 30 students, leaving them severely starved of teachers and basic physical resources. Chapter 7 of the NEP proposes an ambitious structural fix to this isolation: the school complex. Instead of letting small schools struggle alone, a school complex groups a central secondary school with all surrounding primary schools within a 5 to 10 kilometer radius. They then share specialized art and science teachers, counselors, labs, and libraries across the entire network. This integrated network stretches all the way down the educational ladder, linking directly with early childhood care centers. By fully incorporating Anganwadis into the complex, even the youngest learners benefit from the shared resources and seamless transition into the primary system. From a governance standpoint, these complexes act as semi-autonomous units, granting principals and teachers the freedom to manage their own development plans and innovate locally. The school complex model destroys the isolation of rural education. It transforms under-resourced outposts into a vibrant, self-sustaining community. When you step back and look at the framework, the individual mandates connect into a single, cohesive blueprint. It starts with the absolute physical baseline of barrier-free infrastructure and safety. It scales up through targeted equity interventions, utilizing the Gender Inclusion Fund and special education zones. And it is held together by specialized human capital, sharing resources across a highly integrated school complex network. Through the NEP 2020, India constructs an interconnected ecosystem of infrastructure, targeted support, and specialized human capital, ensuring every student's success is a structural certainty. Building a highly competitive 21st-century knowledge economy is simply impossible while still relying on an outdated 19th-century administrative approach to our faculty. The success of India's National Education Policy 2020 depends on a systematic re-engineering of faculty acquisition, their daily service environment, and their professional progression. Rather than simply asking for better instruction, the policy modifies the specific regulatory levers required to guarantee a workforce that is motivated, energized, and capable. The first pillar of this matrix is capability, and its success depends on addressing the historical issue of substandard teacher preparation. For years, standalone teacher education institutions, or TEIs, operated in isolation. They severed pedagogical training from core academic subjects like science and the humanities. The NEP mandates the closure of substandard standalone TEIs, shifting all teacher education into multidisciplinary colleges and universities. By 2030, a 4-year integrated B.Ed degree will become the mandatory minimum qualification for teaching. This new B.Ed curriculum integrates strong practicum training, requiring candidates to spend significant time student teaching at local schools. Strengthening the degree is only the first step. The subsequent recruitment process must match this academic rigor. Teacher eligibility tests, or TETs, are being expanded to cover every stage of school education, from the foundational level through to secondary. For subject-specific teachers, high scores on National Testing Agency subject exams will now supplement the TET results during recruitment. Beyond testing, the policy requires classroom demonstrations and formal interviews to become an integral part of the hiring process. These sessions are designed to gauge an applicant's passion for teaching and their ability to instruct in the local language. This localized hiring strategy ensures that students have role models who are relatable and culturally fluent within their own communities. To pull high-performing rural students into this pipeline, a large volume of merit-based scholarships will be established for 4-year B.Ed programs. These scholarships include a specific incentive. Successful graduates will receive preferential employment in their local geographic area. Further incentives, such as the provision of local housing near school premises, are designed to attract qualified teachers to areas currently facing shortages. By merging multidisciplinary university training with targeted, locally rooted recruitment, the policy engineers capability directly at the source. The second pillar is energy, which focuses on the functional, day-to-day service environment of the educator. Historically, faculty energy has been drained by the practice of excessive and arbitrary teacher transfers. The NEP halts this practice to ensure students have continuity in their role models and learning environments. Teachers also face a heavy burden of non-teaching administrative tasks and the complex logistics of midday meal programs. The policy removes these strenuous duties to ring-fence a teacher's time strictly for classroom instruction and student engagement. A deeper structural challenge stems from the legacy of universal access, which created thousands of small, unviable, single-teacher schools. These micro-schools are economically suboptimal and frequently leave the educator in a state of severe professional isolation. The structural solution is the school complex model, which clusters one secondary school with all primary and pre-primary units in a 5 to 10 kilometer radius. This grouping transforms isolated units into an integrated, semi-autonomous administrative cluster governed by a single management committee. This model provides resource sharing, utilizing the complex's centralized libraries, science laboratories, and computer networks. It also pools human resources, giving students access to specialized teachers in art, music, and sports. The model facilitates the shared deployment of specialized support, including social workers and special educators for children with disabilities. By enabling joint professional development across the cluster, the complex overcomes the isolation that has historically affected rural faculty. To make this agile, authority is devolved from the district education officer directly to these complexes to foster local innovation. By addressing physical isolation and administrative overreach, the school complex ecosystem preserves faculty energy and redirects it toward instruction. The final pillar is motivation, which directly challenges the legacy system of seniority-based promotions. Career management and progression is now strictly decoupled from the mere length of tenure. Tenure, promotions, and salary increments will be determined exclusively by merit and demonstrated performance. The regulatory mechanism for this shift is the National Professional Standards for Teachers, or NPST. The NPST establishes a common framework setting clear expectations for pedagogical expertise at different stages of a teacher's career. Performance appraisals will move beyond subjective reviews to include data from peer reviews, attendance, and commitment to the community. Participation in continuous professional development, or CPD, becomes a central requirement of this appraisal. Every teacher must now complete a minimum of 50 hours of CPD annually to maintain their standing and eligibility for advancement. This training is targeted, focusing on foundational literacy, numeracy, and the transition to competency-based instruction. School principals and complex leaders are held to the same 50-hour mandate, with specific modules focused on academic leadership and management. A crucial innovation in the career path allows for vertical mobility without requiring teachers to change school stages. A teacher at the foundational stage can achieve significant salary increases and career growth without being forced to move to a secondary school role. This design ensures that high-quality teachers can afford to remain in the early, critical stages of cognitive development. Teachers with high leadership metrics will be groomed for academic leadership positions across state and block-level educational institutions. Tying advancement to continuous learning and standardized merit transforms teaching into a dynamic, high-status profession. This framework creates the operational ecosystem required to forge and sustain a high-performing teaching workforce. The policy engineers the environment and the incentives required to produce and retain talent at scale. By shifting preparation to multidisciplinary universities, ending isolation through school clusters, tying career growth to professional standards, this data-driven restructuring serves as the blueprint for returning the teaching profession to its rightful status, ensuring India's future is guided by a motivated, energized, and capable faculty. Think of a nation's education system as a massive engine for social mobility. It's designed to take raw human potential and convert it into opportunity. But right now, that engine sputters and loses power at critical connection points. Over the last few decades, aggressive enrollment policies successfully pushed young children into the primary school system. We solved the problem of getting kids through the front door. The issue is keeping them in the building as they get older. The students slipping through the cracks fall into a broad demographic category known as socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, or SEDS. This includes students facing geographic isolation, systemic poverty, and caste discrimination, and marginalized gender identities. This chart maps out UDICE student enrollment data from the 2016 to 2017 academic year. You can see a steady progression through the early grades, but as the timeline approaches higher education, there's a massive, steep drop-off. Splitting the main line, the disparity is glaring. Enrollment curves for scheduled castes, tribes, and disabled students plummet far steeper than the national average. The data paints a very clear picture. Without an engineered, systemic intervention, the educational pipeline actively fails its most vulnerable students right when they reach the threshold of higher-level opportunity. To fix a geographically localized problem, the National Education Policy rolls out special education zones. This map overlays historical dropout data with these new boundaries, lighting up targeted areas that require maximum state intervention. Within these zones, the government is mandated to physically upgrade infrastructure and build new institutions, like Kendriya Vidyalas, to ensure students have safe, localized access to quality secondary education. Inside these disadvantaged zones, female and transgender students face intersecting cultural and financial barriers that push them out of the classroom. Geography is one layer of the problem. Gender and economics create another. To bypass these specific hurdles, the policy establishes a dedicated gender inclusion fund. This operates as a specialized financial patch designed to help states clear local, context-specific roadblocks. In practice, this means distributing scholarships, providing bicycles for safe transport, and building secure sanitation facilities. It removes the practical excuses that keep marginalized youth out of school. By treating inequity as a set of distinct variables, geography, gender, finance, the policy builds customized bridges over the dropout gaps. Children with special needs face an entirely different set of structural barriers. Historically, they have navigated a system built without accommodating their participation. The NEP incorporates the legal standards of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, mandating barrier-free architectural access and the deployment of targeted assistive learning technologies across classrooms. Adding ramps and software addresses the physical space. However, physical access achieves very little if the psychological environment of the school remains hostile or indifferent to the students themselves. To address that, the policy mandates a rewire of the school's social environment. This requires deep teacher sensitization, inclusive pedagogical training, and embedding trained social workers into the school ecosystem. At the curriculum level, outdated biases and stereotypes are actively stripped out and replaced with globally inclusive, humanistic material that reflects a wider diversity of student identities. True educational equity happens when physical upgrades are met with sensitized teachers, specialized social workers, and a curriculum designed to include every student. When you combine special education zones, targeted inclusion funds, and cultural shifts, you start patching the leaks in the pipeline. You build a secure bridge directly to higher education. To ensure students can actually cross that bridge, secondary assessments and the National Testing Agency's university entrance exams are being structurally realigned to be equitable, reducing the reliance on expensive private coaching. The macroeconomic aim is to ensure that the largest young population in the world reaches the workforce with secondary and higher education credentials, rather than exiting the system before they acquire technical and professional skills. This diagram maps the core architecture. Every distinct policy intervention, targeting disadvantaged groups, gender inclusion funds, local zones, or accommodations, is rooted in equity and inclusion. Together, they funnel directly into one unified outcome, getting students the specific support they need to reach higher learning. The National Education Policy engineers a system where a student's starting coordinates no longer dictate their final intellectual destination. Building a modern nation requires advanced infrastructure, but the actual foundation rests on the people tasked with building its minds, the teachers. Over the years, the teaching profession in India has seen its prestige decline, making it harder to attract top-tier academic talent into the classroom. The national education policy traces this decline to the source: thousands of substandard, standalone teacher education institutions. By operating in isolation, these institutes cut educators off from the wider academic world, training them without meaningful interaction with the arts, sciences, or humanities. When trading happens inside these dark silos, quality control becomes nearly impossible to maintain, leading to inconsistent standards across the country. Keeping our educators academically segregated places a fixed ceiling on the quality of instruction they can eventually pass down to their students. The 2020 policy recognizes that minor tweaks will fail to solve the core problem. Rewriting a syllabus is one thing, but to see real improvement, the government is changing the entire physical setting where instruction takes place. The policy sets a hard deadline for this transition: a complete structural overhaul of the system to phase out the siloed model by 2030. To improve the final output of student learning, the government is tearing down and rebuilding the mechanism of how teachers are trained. The old standalone model is being replaced. By 2030, all teacher education will move into large multidisciplinary colleges and universities. Anchoring this new ecosystem is a revised standard for the profession, a 4-year integrated B.Ed degree. The curriculum demands rigorous subject-specific knowledge, training in modern pedagogical techniques, and strategies for teaching foundational literacy and numeracy. It also mandates hands-on, real-world practicums, placing future educators directly into local classrooms to practice their craft long before graduation. Moving teacher preparation into universities ensures educators learn in the same environments as engineers and scientists, expanding their intellectual worldview. Transitioning to a strict 4-year requirement takes time, so the policy includes adaptive pathways for those who already hold higher education degrees. Students with an existing bachelor's degree can enter a 2-year B.Ed program, while those who already hold a master's degree can qualify through a condensed 1-year track. The pipeline also creates secondary routes for special educators, alongside certification options to bring regional artisans and vocational experts directly into schools as master instructors. To ensure these diverse entry points don't dilute the quality of the teaching pool, the policy introduces the National Professional Standards for Teachers, or NPST. These distinct pipelines, bound by national standards, create a regulated ecosystem that remains flexible enough to attract talent from various backgrounds. For the old, standalone institutes, the reality is clear: adapt to these new multidisciplinary standards or face being completely shut down. The goal is an environment where teachers regain their status as deeply respected, highly educated scholars. The clock is ticking, with 2030 set as the absolute deadline for standardizing the 4-year integrated degree nationwide. This plan rests on 4 pillars: moving training into universities, standardizing the 4-year degree, closing failing institutes, and enforcing quality through the NPST. By moving training into the university system, the policy builds a rigorous scholarly identity for teachers, tying their social prestige directly to their academic depth. The rise of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and climate change is forcing a global pivot away from traditional manual employment. As these technologies mature, they are steadily eliminating sectors historically reliant on unskilled manual labor. In their place, the market is demanding a highly adaptable workforce, people capable of applying multidisciplinary thinking to complex, evolving problems. The global response to this economic shift is outlined in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which India adopted to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education. This requires a shift in how the education system operates. Schools must prioritize the ability to think critically and innovate over the static memorization of content. Preparing a generation for an unpredictable future requires an educational infrastructure where applied, practical skills are valued exactly as highly as academic theory. Historically, education systems have forced a strict hierarchical divide. Academic subjects sat at the prestigious top, while vocational training was isolated at the bottom, carrying a persistent social stigma. The National Education Policy 2020 is designed to dismantle that exact structure. The policy enforces a strict operational rule. There will be no hard separations between the arts, the sciences, and vocational streams. By deliberately erasing the boundary between those who study and those who create, the system builds the groundwork for a truly adaptable, multidisciplinary generation. This integration starts early. During the middle stage, covering grades 6 through 8, students are introduced to mandatory survey courses in vocational skills. Depending on local skilling needs, schools will introduce hands-on practice in trades like carpentry, electrical work, metalwork, and pottery. Students will also participate in a 10-day bagless period. They leave their textbooks at home and intern directly with local vocational experts in their community. Schools are encouraged to schedule similar bagless days throughout the entire academic year to consistently break the routine of purely textbook-based learning. This early, hands-on exposure takes vocational skills out of abstract theory and places them squarely into context as respected, tangible community roles. Delivering specialized vocational training across millions of small, geographically isolated schools presents a massive logistical challenge. The policy solves this by grouping independent neighborhood schools into unified school complexes. This allows schools to share centralized resources like skill labs, computer centers, and equipment. Complexes are also granted autonomy to hire local artisans, tradespeople, and entrepreneurs to serve as master instructors. Bringing these local experts into the school system serves a dual purpose. It provides top-tier instruction while preserving traditional indigenous knowledge and local professions. Consolidating these scattered resources into centralized school complexes is the exact systemic mechanism that makes high-quality, universal vocational training economically and operationally viable. By the time students reach the secondary stage, in grades 9 through 12, the distinction between curricular and extracurricular subjects is completely removed. A student has the total freedom to mix advanced academic subjects, like physics, with vocational courses like metalwork or fine arts. For those needing non-formal pathways, the system expands open and distance swimming programs, offering comprehensive vocational courses entirely online. The curriculum also supports highly specialized integrations, like opening National Cadet Corps wings in secondary schools for students aiming for careers in the Defense Forces. By offering multiple, highly flexible pathways, secondary students can precisely design their education around their individual life aspirations and career goals. These structural reforms target the development of the individual student, moving past the narrow goal of labor market readiness. Consistent hands-on learning forces collaboration. It builds resilience, fosters teamwork, and instills a deep ethical respect for the dignity of all forms of labor. This modern framework echoes India's ancient heritage of multidisciplinary education, seen in institutions like Nalanda, where diverse knowledge and crafts were studied side by side. True national development requires citizens whose ethical character and respect for others are developed just as rigorously as their cognitive abilities. By removing the barrier between academic and vocational, introducing hands-on skills in middle school, building infrastructure for local experts, and allowing customizable pathways in high school, the National Education Policy translates holistic education into an actionable ecosystem, ready for the 21st century.
The global knowledge landscape is changing. As artificial intelligence and big data automate unskilled jobs, the demand for a workforce skilled in mathematics, computer science, and data science is increasing. These technological shifts are happening alongside physical ones. Depleting natural resources and climate change are forcing a shift in how the world meets its basic needs for food, water, and energy. Managing the emergence of pandemics requires collaborative research that bridges infectious disease management with an understanding of resultant social issues. Rote learning cannot address these compounding crises. When the employment landscape and the global ecosystem change this quickly, the education system must move toward teaching students how to think critically and solve problems in novel fields. To meet 21st century imperatives, pedagogy must evolve to be inquiry-driven and discovery-oriented, focusing on adaptability and multidisciplinary innovation. The National Education Policy identifies outstanding research as a co-requisite for outstanding education and national development. One cannot reach the desired standard without the other. Historically, the system has lacked a unified engine for this. Without a central framework for funding and focus, research has often remained isolated from the broader educational structure. Shifting the nation's trajectory requires a reconfiguration of the education structure, moving away from passive content consumption toward active knowledge generation. The National Research Foundation coordinates and scales research nationwide. It removes hard separations between disciplines, allowing different areas to interact. Effective disease management, for example, relies on biology for vaccines, social sciences for public behavior, and humanities to address ethics. Institutionalizing this cross-pollination aligns our research capabilities with the multidisciplinary nature of 21st century problem-solving. The NRF seeds and facilitates this research directly within universities and colleges, providing the resources for faculty and students to pursue high-level inquiry. Integrating research into the higher education system creates a discovery-oriented environment. Students no longer just absorb facts, they actively participate in uncovering them. This approach mirrors ancient Indian institutions like Nalanda, which achieved global recognition by hosting diverse scholars to teach and research in a single integrated setting. Today's multidisciplinary centers replicate ancient sites like Takshashila, where the pursuit of knowledge across mathematics, medicine, and philosophy was treated as a unified goal. The NRF acts as the beating heart of this system, ensuring that the higher education ecosystem is structured around active discovery rather than static instruction. This creates a system where learners are equipped to innovate and absorb new material. They develop the cognitive capacities to think critically and solve problems, in a world where the knowledge landscape is constantly shifting. By fostering these capabilities, the policy aims to maximize the country's rich talents for the benefit of the individual, the society, and the world. The ultimate objective is the sustainable transformation of India into a vibrant knowledge society. The NRF links multidisciplinary research in the sciences and humanities directly to the global challenges identified at the start of this decade. This focus on research as a co-requisite to learning provides the foundation for educational excellence, positioning the country to take a leadership role in global development. By placing the National Research Foundation at the center of the learning process, India builds upon its traditional values to secure its future as a global knowledge superpower.
Global shifts are accelerating. Between the rise of artificial intelligence, complex climate changes, and entirely new employment landscapes, the workforce is facing a demand for skills that didn't exist a decade ago. Navigating this environment requires a workforce that is agile, creative, and trained across multiple disciplines. Students must learn how to think critically and solve problems in novel, changing fields. But there is a structural barrier in the way. It is difficult to cultivate a flexible 21st century mind inside a rigid, bureaucratic system designed for a different era. For decades, the systems governing higher education have relied on heavy, siloed structures. Under the pressure of modern demands, that machinery is straining. If we think of education as the engine of a nation's development, government regulation is the underlying operating system that dictates its speed and efficiency. To maintain national growth, India's higher education regulatory system required a structural upgrade to clear out systemic stagnation. This upgrade involves a massive legislative overhaul, rethinking the rules from the very top of the governance structure. Ignoring the flaws in this regulatory plumbing limits what students can achieve. Rebuilding the framework is the first step to ensuring the country can compete on a global stage. The National Education Policy 2020 introduces a comprehensive plan to transform how higher education is regulated. The entire philosophy of this new framework is built on a specific principle: light but tight. On the light side, restrictive silos and rigid boundaries are dissolved. This shifts the focus towards institutional autonomy. Under this model, the government removes the hard separations between subjects like arts and sciences, ending the practice of top-down micromanagement. Institutions gain the freedom to innovate. They can develop multidisciplinary programs and experiment with new pedagogical styles without seeking bureaucratic approval for every change. This structural openness aims to move the campus from a culture of administrative compliance to one of active academic inquiry. However, granting this level of freedom raises a question. How does the system prevent autonomy from leading to a lack of accountability or a drop in standards? This is where the tight portion of the matrix comes in. Robust guardrails are set to ensure absolute integrity. These are enforced through rigorous audits, requiring high financial and academic transparency. Finally, mandatory public disclosure of resources and student outcomes makes institutions directly accountable. This emphasis on integrity and public service is rooted in the values of the Indian Constitution, ensuring that education remains a public good. Enforcing these operational standards is what secures the integrity of the degree and the value of the student's investment. When institutions are both free to innovate and required to be transparent, the focus naturally shifts toward achieving excellence rather than just meeting minimum requirements. This shift aligns India with the Global Education Development Agenda, specifically the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4, which seeks to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all by 2030. By meeting these international benchmarks, India can better develop its rich pool of young talent and resources for the benefit of both the individual and the society. The move toward multidisciplinary autonomous centers of learning aligns with India's earliest educational models. Ancient institutions like Nalanda and Takshashila once set the world standard for multidisciplinary teaching and research, hosting scholars from across the globe. The ultimate goal of the NEP 2020 transformation is to restore India's position as a global knowledge superpower. This interconnected system links every reform. Regulatory transformation enables institutional autonomy. Autonomy, paired with public disclosure, sparks innovation, and that innovation leads to a global knowledge superpower. By overhauling the invisible plumbing of regulation, the government aims to ensure that every student has a path to the high-quality education required for India's continued economic and social growth.
The global economy is shifting faster than our ability to track it. An education system must be as agile as the technology it teaches. But many universities are finding it difficult to move. They are often slowed down by administrative layers that prioritize paperwork over actual instruction. This friction is often a byproduct of a centralized system. Regulations originally designed to maintain quality have become a source of institutional gridlock. It's a stark change from India's earliest centers of learning. Ancient sites like Nalanda prioritized multidisciplinary research and the freedom to pursue new ideas. This creates a paradox. While strict oversight is intended to prevent failure, excessive micromanagement can make it impossible for even the best institutions to achieve excellence. Resolving this tension requires a shift in how higher education is governed, moving away from a culture of compliance and towards a system designed for institutional growth. The National Education Policy 2020 introduces a light but tight framework. The tight side focuses on clear, non-negotiable standards, prioritizing financial transparency and rigorous audits. This is achieved through public disclosure, shifting the regulatory burden to the public. This targeted accountability makes it easier to identify and remove substandard institutions without creating a bottleneck for the entire system. Systemic integrity and transparency provide the foundation of trust necessary to grant institutions their freedom. With that foundation set, the light side of the framework takes effect, granting academic and administrative autonomy to institutions that prove they can handle it. This allows universities to redesign their own curricula and bridge the gap between arts and sciences without waiting for external permission. The goal is to cultivate more institutions like IIT Delhi, places that are empowered to set their own direction and respond directly to global changes. It places the responsibility back on faculty and internal boards, trusting institutional heads to make independent decisions. Removing the fear of micromanagement opens the door for higher quality research and more energized faculty. Real institutional progress happens when educators are trusted to lead their own academic missions, rather than following a one-size-fits-all mandate. This move toward autonomous, trusted hubs mirrors the very structures that allowed ancient Indian education to lead the world.
On a macro level, the focus is on creating students who are adaptable and capable of navigating the complexities of the 21st century. The entire system relies on a central starting point: effective governance. This enables two branches: transparency to maintain trust and autonomy to allow for growth. Working together, they lead to empowered leadership and the breakthrough innovation required for our future. The light but tight shift is about more than administrative efficiency. It's the mechanism that allows educational policy to keep pace with a changing world.
The traditional pipeline of professional education is fracturing under the weight of rapid technological change. The rigid track of moving from high school straight into an isolated degree no longer matches the reality of the global economy. Three specific technological drivers are causing this disruption: the explosive rise of big data, the integration of machine learning into daily workflows, and the widespread application of artificial intelligence. This environment illustrates the traditional coaching culture, where success depends on high-stakes testing. However, technological advances are making many jobs that rely on highly specialized, rote memorization skills rapidly obsolete. Current global demand has shifted toward a workforce that combines hard data sciences with the social sciences and humanities. Future professionals must be able to synthesize technical data within complex human contexts. To address this, the National Education Policy 2020 requires professional education to move away from mere content mastery. Instead, institutions must prioritize teaching professionals how to think critically and how to learn, ensuring they can adapt as their fields evolve. We see this requirement in the effort to resolve energy, climate, and sanitation crises. These challenges require multidisciplinary problem-solving, as isolated technical skills are insufficient to manage complex, overlapping systems. Over the next decade, India will host the highest population of young people in the world. The country's economic future depends on providing this demographic with educational opportunities that are as flexible as the global market they will enter. This photograph of the United Nations Assembly highlights the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which India has adopted. To meet these global targets, India is re-architecting its educational infrastructure, converting a rigid pipeline into a flexible learning ecosystem. Historically, India's professional education system relied on isolated disciplines. Students were forced into narrow paths early in their development, which often prevented them from exploring adjacent fields of knowledge. The NEP eliminates these specific divides. The policy removes the hard separations between the arts and sciences, and between curricular and extracurricular activities. These silos created hierarchies that favored certain subjects over others. By walling off disciplines, the previous systems stifled cognitive flexibility and limited the career trajectories available to students. This diagram illustrates the structural integration of vocational and academic streams. Vocational crafts are woven into the core of professional preparation. Students gain the flexibility to choose their trajectories, allowing a future engineer to study music theory, enabling multidisciplinary life plans. The policy facilitates multiple pathways to learning by expanding open and distance learning modes. This ensures that non-formal schooling provides the same professional accreditation and opportunity as formal institutions. To support this breadth, universities and colleges will move toward becoming large, multidisciplinary institutions. These hubs will house diverse departments, allowing students to access a wide range of subjects on a single campus. This structural integration aims to reflect the interconnected nature of knowledge. It acknowledges that in professional practice, solutions often require insights from several different disciplines simultaneously. Removing these silos is not about diluting technical expertise. It is about engineering professionals who can navigate the complex intersections where innovation actually happens, such as the overlap of biology, ethics, and data science. Institutional restructuring is paired with a shift in pedagogy. Classroom assessment will move from high-stakes summative exams toward regular, formative evaluations that prioritize the development of core competencies over memorization. This allows for the integration of essential life skills into the daily curriculum, including critical thinking, oral and written communication, resilience, and teamwork. To make room for these skills,
the policy reduces mandated curriculum content to its core essentials. This reduction creates the necessary space for inquiry-based and discussion-based learning. Students spend less time absorbing facts and more time exploring the applications and problems associated with those facts. The framework introduces art-integrated education as a standard approach.
By using cultural forms to teach concepts, schools strengthen the link between analytical problem-solving and Indian artistic traditions. Similarly, sports-integrated education develops collaboration and self-discipline. It uses physical activity to foster the psychological well-being and teamwork necessary for modern professional environments. To ground these concepts in practice, the policy mandates vocational craft internships and bagless days. Students spend time interning with local experts in fields like carpentry or electric work, gaining direct exposure to practical trades. This pedagogical shift transforms the student into an active problem solver. By focusing on experience rather than passive reception, the system prepares them for a volatile and changing job market. Technical capability is only one half of the professional equation. The NEP asserts that education must also develop character, grounding professional skill in a strong ethical framework. The state emblem of India serves as a visual anchor for the constitutional values the curriculum integrates: empathy, a democratic spirit, scientific temper, and justice. Students will be taught a logical framework for making ethical decisions. This training applies to real-world professional scenarios, such as preventing plagiarism, respecting the environment, and upholding integrity in the workplace. These values are reinforced by the Knowledge of India component, which integrates the country's historical contributions into the modern curriculum. These ruins of Nalanda University remind us of India's history of world-class multidisciplinary teaching. The policy seeks to scientifically incorporate these ancient knowledge systems into modern professional training. Traditional Indian insights are directly relevant to fields like mathematics, astronomy, architecture, medicine, and sustainable agriculture. To ensure these complex concepts are mastered, the policy promotes multilingualism. Young professionals grasp non-trivial concepts more effectively when the medium of instruction matches their home language. Rooting professional education in the Indian ethos provides the cultural confidence and ethical grounding required to lead in a globalized economy. Delivering a flexible, multilingual curriculum at scale requires the integration of extensive educational technology. This diagram shows a proposed AI-based dashboard. It tracks a student's holistic progress card, monitoring growth across cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains throughout their school years. This data provides students with clear information about their specific strengths. It serves as a tool to help them make informed, optimal choices regarding their professional careers. Technology will also be used to remove language barriers and increase access for Divyang students, ensuring that technical tools support inclusive learning environments. This technological push is paired with a mandate for equity. The NEP identifies education as the primary tool for achieving social justice and bridging existing social category gaps. This photograph of students underscores the real-world stakes for socioeconomically disadvantaged groups. Historically, these populations have faced significant barriers in accessing high-quality professional tracks. To address this, the policy creates special education zones in disadvantaged regions and establishes gender inclusion funds to provide the infrastructure and scholarships necessary for universal access. A multidisciplinary professional system is only effective if it is accessible. National development requires that these new educational pathways are technologically supported and available to every student, regardless of background. When we zoom out, it becomes clear that these individual changes are interconnected parts of a unified architecture. This blueprint organizes professional growth around 5 macro categories: multidisciplinarity, experiential pedagogy, ethical frameworks, tech integration, and the elimination of silos. Professional education moves from a localized, terminal degree track toward a continuous model that prioritizes versatile, transferable skill sets. This system produces practitioners who possess both technical competence and the character traits, such as resilience and empathy, required to navigate an unpredictable technology-driven economy. This interconnected framework provides the foundation for a 2040 education system designed for equitable access, multidisciplinary research, and professional agility. The global knowledge landscape is rapidly shifting. With aggressive advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, routine physical labor is increasingly automated out of existence. As machines absorb unskilled work, the global economy demands a new profile: multidisciplinary workers skilled in mathematics, computer science, and data analysis, alongside the humanities. This animated diagram outlines the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4. Adopted globally, it mandates inclusive and equitable quality education while specifically demanding lifelong learning opportunities for all. India's National Education Policy 2020 serves as the structural mechanism to meet this exact global target. The demographics force the issue. Over the next decade, India will hold the highest population of young people in the world. Surviving this economic reality requires abandoning the traditional concept of terminal schooling, where education abruptly ends at graduation, and engineering a system designed to support continuous learning across an entire lifespan. Adding a 10-year projection reveals the long-term damage. Millions exit entirely, creating severe deficits in human capital and socioeconomic mobility. A system bleeding nearly half its students at the secondary level cannot adequately train adults for a disruptive economy. A complete structural overhaul is required. The first step in that overhaul is dismantling the rigid 10+2 academic structure. This grid maps the replacement, a 5+3+3+4 framework aligning with cognitive development. It integrates early childhood care into primary grades, introduces specialized subject teachers for middle stages, and ends with a flexible, multidisciplinary 4-year secondary block allowing vocational paths. Across all stages, the objective moves away from content memorization. The focus shifts to teaching students how to think critically, solve problems, and adapt. The 5+3+3+4 model reorganizes the timeline of childhood education to install the exact cognitive flexibility an adult will need to continually upskill later in life. To ensure that flexibility survives the classroom, the policy mandates the removal of hard separations between the arts and the sciences. It also eliminates the historical divide separating academic study from vocational training. Students in grades 6 through 8 will participate in a 10-day bagless period, interning directly with local vocational experts like carpenters, artists, and agricultural workers. Parallel to this hands-on experience, subjects critical to the modern economy, including mathematics, coding, and computational thinking, are integrated into the middle stage. Cognitive development is further accelerated by instructing students in their home language, or mother tongue, until at least grade 5, allowing young learners to grasp complex concepts without an initial language barrier. By stripping away academic silos and enforcing early vocational exposure, the curriculum ensures the future workforce can operate seamlessly across disciplines. Even with a modernized curriculum, relying strictly on physical brick-and-mortar schooling is mathematically insufficient to capture millions of dropouts or provide mass education to adults. This chart illustrates a parallel framework, expanding open and distance learning. Nodes map open schooling equivalency levels directly back to formal grades 3, 5, 8, 10, and 12. These distance programs also house vocational courses and adult literacy initiatives. State institutes of open schooling will mirror these exact offerings, delivering them entirely in regional languages. This architecture creates a permanent, accessible safety net. It provides a structural guarantee that any citizen can step back into the education pipeline at any point in their adult life. For this architecture to function, the most basic educational metric must be secured. The policy establishes an urgent national mission to achieve universal foundational literacy and numeracy in primary schools by 2025. This visual network represents the decentralized, community-based model proposed to combat the current learning crisis, turning localized knowledge into a viral resource. The policy calls for large-scale one-on-one peer tutoring. Literate community members and trained volunteers will be mobilized to teach reading and arithmetic directly to their neighbors. Public and school libraries will be significantly expanded, keeping their doors open during non-school hours to serve adult learners and host local book clubs. Education ceases to be an isolated task managed strictly by institutions. It becomes a continuous, society-wide ecosystem maintained by the community itself. India is moving from a rigid, terminal schooling structure to to an interconnected, lifelong learning grid. True adult education demands an infrastructure that anticipates dropouts, integrates vocational reality from a young age, and offers continuous, open-access reentry points. This structural shift serves the National Education Policy's ultimate 2040 vision, to transform India into an equitable global knowledge superpower, represented here by the integration of the Indian tricolor with a modern technological network. Achieving this scale requires treating education as a public service and a basic right, available to every citizen regardless of their economic background or age. By embedding cognitive flexibility into the earliest years of development, the NEP equips the next generation with the tools to continually adapt, ensuring the nation's resilience in an era of global disruption.
Navigating the future economy requires more than just memorizing a list of tasks. In a world defined by automation and shifting technology, the primary requirement for a student is the ability to learn how to learn. This process stalls when foundational education happens in a language the child doesn't speak at home. The brain spends its energy decoding words instead of grasping the concepts, while native language instruction allows ideas to flow with immediate clarity. Legacy education systems often ignored this barrier. They removed local languages from the classroom and treated the arts as optional extras, rather than seeing them as tools for understanding the world. This detachment creates a vacuum between a student's home and their school. Without a cultural or linguistic connection to the material, students frequently rely on rote memorization just to pass through the system. Separating a student from their linguistic roots limits their ability to think critically. It produces workers who can follow instructions, but who lack the cognitive tools to innovate within their own society. The National Education Policy addresses this by prioritizing the brain's natural linguistic advantages. It mandates the mother tongue as the medium of instruction until at least grade 5, ensuring that the first layer of learning happens in the language the student knows best. This grounding continues through art-integrated education. The geometric precision of a Bharatanatyam dancer provides a physical way to teach abstract concepts. The classroom uses these local arts to turn physical movement into lessons on angles and physics. Middle school students apply this logic through vocational crafts. By interning with local weavers or carpenters, they see the high-level technical skill required by traditional trades, grounding their education in practical problem-solving. By integrating the language of the home and the tactile arts of the community, the classroom stops being a foreign environment, becoming a space that supports a child's early development. This local foundation scales upward into a national framework. Through a flexible 3-language formula, students navigate India's linguistic diversity while maintaining their native base. These palm leaf manuscripts in languages like Sanskrit and Tamil function as rigorous scientific repositories. This precise script recorded centuries of technical observations, from astronomical cycles to medical formulas. These ancient records underpin Indian knowledge systems. The massive stone instruments at Jantar Mantar reflect this history, showing a mastery of mathematics and civil engineering on a monumental scale. The curriculum pairs this scientific history with lessons on constitutional values. It uses the preamble to establish the ethical standards required for modern citizenship. Embedding this multidisciplinary history into modern schooling gives students a proven framework for complex problem-solving. To prepare students for a global environment, the policy removes the separations between subjects. Arts, sciences, and vocational paths are merged into a single interwoven stream of study. This flexibility allows students to study foreign languages and global subjects without losing their native foundation. Modern fields like data science and artificial intelligence require this synthesis. They demand a combination of hard mathematics, humanities, and ethical reasoning. Removing these academic boundaries ensures that students are equipped to innovate across diverse and changing industries. Rooting the curriculum in Indian languages and culture directly impacts cognitive development. It allows students to use the linguistic pathways their brains have already optimized for processing complex ideas. The journey moves from the cognitive boost of the mother tongue through the analytical depth of classical knowledge systems and into the multidisciplinary flexibility needed for the global stage. These elements are connected nodes in a single architecture. They work together to build a specific kind of learner. At the center of this strategy is a new profile, the holistic learner. The ability to innovate in a changing world depends on this foundation. By starting in the soil of their own culture, students gain the cognitive agility to solve problems in any environment. The global economy is undergoing a systemic overhaul. The industrial mechanics of the last century are dissolving, replaced by a landscape dominated by artificial intelligence and machine learning. This shift confronts educators with an urgent question: how to prepare students for a job market where many traditional roles are being redefined by automation before they even graduate. For an economic transition of this scale, simply distributing hardware to classrooms is a superficial fix that fails to address the underlying change in the nature of work. Historically, education systems treated technology as an isolated subject, a specialized skill taught for 45 minutes a week in a disconnected computer lab. Confining technology to a separate room created stark disparities. Students without English proficiency or access to expensive devices were effectively locked out of the digital economy before they finished primary school. The National Education Policy 2020 integrates technology into the structural bedrock of the learning environment. Navigating the global digital shift requires pulling the wires out of the computer lab and using them to rebuild the infrastructure of learning from the ground up. The first pillar of this system targets the curriculum. Computational thinking and coding are now woven directly into the middle stage of education, making digital logic a core literacy. In earlier years, interactive apps and gamification assist with foundational literacy. These tools adapt to regional mother tongues, ensuring a child's home language isn't a barrier to their digital development. This AI software tracks a student's holistic development over their school career, clustering data points to reveal emerging strengths missed by traditional tests. These clusters are then projected forward, giving parents and teachers evidence-based insights to align students with ideal future career paths. This shift moves the focus of schooling away from memorization for standardized tests and toward a personalized, continuous learning journey. Classroom technology only reaches its potential when it is supported by educators who are continuously upskilled. This diagram shows the Diksha platform, which serves as a centralized repository for high-quality teaching resources. It functions as a hub, distributing training modules directly to educators across the country. Even in remote areas, Anganwadi workers use simple DTH channels and smartphones to receive professional development, allowing them to upgrade their skills without leaving their communities. Pilot programs also deploy digital aids directly into the classroom to help teachers bridge communication gaps with students from diverse linguistic backgrounds. For a nation of India's scale, these digital training networks are the only viable way to raise teaching standards for millions of students simultaneously. The third pillar uses technology to dismantle historic barriers that excluded students from quality education. For students with disabilities, the policy mandates assistive devices and tailored software to ensure they can participate fully in a regular classroom setting. National open schooling platforms have been expanded to provide remote, high-quality alternatives for students who are geographically isolated or unable to attend physical schools. Supported by new digital libraries, a student in a rural village accesses the same vast materials as peers in urban centers. This digital infrastructure ensures that geography, socioeconomic status, or physical ability no longer determine the upper limit of a student's potential. The integration of technology described in the NEP 2020 is not a goal in itself. The pedagogical objective is to move away from rote learning and teach students the mechanics of how to think, adapt, and learn new material independently. The value of this transition is the agile, innovative mindset it instills in the next generation, preparing them to thrive in a changing global ecosystem. This entire ecosystem relies on the synergy between learner skills, educator empowerment, and universal access. This mind map illustrates the strategy: tech integration at the core, branching into student development, teacher support, and accessibility infrastructure to create a unified, digitally resilient system. The NEP 2020 wires the future of the nation by making digital fluency a permanent, inseparable feature of the Indian student experience. The global knowledge landscape is changing rapidly. As automation replaces unskilled labor, The demand for data science and multidisciplinary expertise is rising, yet millions of learners remain locked out of these fields by geographic and social barriers. Preparing 1 billion minds for this environment requires education to move beyond the physical classroom. To reach everyone, the system must become decentralized and digital. The National Education Policy 2020 builds technology directly into the system's foundation, using digital tools to scale resources across regions where physical infrastructure has historically failed to reach. This integration begins with digital literacy. During the middle stage of education, students begin learning coding and computational thinking, preparing them to navigate a workforce increasingly defined by artificial intelligence. For Divyang students, or those with disabilities, technology provides immediate accessibility. Assistive devices and flexible software allow for self-paced learning, ensuring that physical impairments do not limit academic progress. This data visualization shows a shift toward holistic tracking. Instead of relying on a single high-stakes exam, AI-based software monitors a student's progress across cognitive, emotional, and physical domains to identify their specific strengths over time. Digital empowerment focuses on using algorithms and assistive hardware to bypass physical constraints and unlock individual student potential. The policy also targets foundational educators. Workers at rural Anganwadi centers can now earn certifications through DTH television channels and smartphones, upgrading their skills without leaving their local communities. For established teachers, training is now continuous. Every educator is expected to complete 50 hours of professional development annually, using online modules to stay current with modern pedagogical research. To stabilize the workforce, the policy uses online, computerized portals to manage teacher transfers. This replaces the old arbitrary system with a transparent process that keeps qualified educators where they are needed most. This digital fluency ensures that teachers across the country have the same tools to deliver a modern curriculum equitably. To maximize resources, the school complex model groups small neighborhood schools around a central secondary hub. These hubs share their digital infrastructure with the smaller satellites. If a village school lacks a local expert, students can join virtual classes broadcast from the central secondary school. This network is supported by Diksha, a national repository that provides high-quality learning materials in multiple regional languages to bridge local communication gaps. Accompanying this is a system of digital libraries, giving students in remote areas access to the same books and research materials available in major urban centers. Because building physical schools in every habitation takes time, the digital cloud serves as the only immediate way to distribute resources to every student in the country. By integrating these systems, the policy ensures that a student's language, location, or physical ability no longer determines their access to world-class knowledge. If we step back, we can now see exactly how all of these different nodes connect to form the new educational ecosystem. At its center is equitable digital education, relying on 3 pillars: empowering learners, upgrading educators, and expanding infrastructure. These use specific tools: AI tracking and coding, online teacher training, plus DIKHA and virtual clusters linking schools to the cloud. The 2020 digital mandate creates an integrated system where location and language no longer restrict a student's access to high-quality learning.
If you look at India's education system today, you'll see a massive machine where the parts operate independently. Early childhood centers, primary schools, and higher education institutions each turn on their own, rarely synchronizing their efforts. The National Education Policy 2020 lays out a comprehensive blueprint to fix this, but putting that plan into practice reveals a mechanical problem. There needs to be a central hub where all these separate systems intersect. That hub is CABE, the Central Advisory Board of Education. It is the apex advisory body tasked with filling this void. Its clear mandate is to ensure seamless integration. It coordinates across all institutions and stages of learning so that a student's journey from preschool to university becomes a single, continuous pathway. Without a unified coordinating body, even the best-designed pedagogical reforms will stall out. The governance engine has to be connected before the gears can actually turn.
Education in India is a concurrent subject, sharing power between national and state governments. This creates operational friction. Enforcing unified top-down visions collides with localized state needs. CAB acts as the interactive forum resolving this, mapping broad national targets onto specific local contexts. Integrating a nation of this size requires a mechanism that respects local state autonomy while still holding the entire system accountable to the same national standards. Shifting to the new 5+3+3+4 model adds early childhood care, forcing 3 different ministries into the same operational space. CAB provides continuous guidance, untangling these overlapping jurisdictions to ensure unified curriculum delivery from preschool upward. This untangling process applies directly to the NEP's broader regulatory philosophy, which is described as light but tight. CAB strips away the heavy bureaucratic inputs to give schools the autonomy they need to operate, while strictly enforcing the output potential and actual learning outcomes. Enforcing the tight side of this framework requires the uncompromising authority of the state to ensure compliance across all educational boards. Let's test this. Which apex body coordinates a state's desire to innovate a local vocational program while maintaining the national curricular framework? It's CAB. A structural shift like 5+3+3+4 only works when interdepartmental conflicts are resolved by a single balanced authority. CAB is the mechanism that takes the NEP from a theoretical policy document and turns it into a functioning operational reality. To see how this works in practice, we can map out its 4 primary coordination mechanisms: seamless integration across learning stages, center-state coordination for localized deployment, light but tight regulation for balanced oversight, and inter-ministry synergy to prevent administrative roadblocks. This image shows the saffron, white, and green brushstrokes of the Indian flag. Optimizing this bureaucratic engine is how India builds an equitable, vibrant knowledge society rooted in national pride. Empowering this advisory core is the absolute prerequisite for ensuring the gears of India's educational future turn as one.
Education is designed to be the great equalizer. But right now, the quality of a child's schooling relies heavily on exactly where they live and what their parents earn. The data shows the cracks in the system. Over 3.22 crore children are currently out of school, with enrollment dropping sharply right after 5th grade. When we look closely, we see the challenge of scale. Our guide here represents a student in one of India's 100,000 single-teacher schools, facilities operating completely without the budget for basic science labs or specialized subject teachers. To hit the national education policy's goal of universal learning, the system needs a complete rewrite. It has to solve 2 problems at once: building efficiency in how money is saved, and engineering equity in how it is spent. Operating thousands of tiny, under-enrolled schools drains budgets. Administrative overhead duplicates across every isolated building, absorbing capital meant directly for learning materials. The policy introduces a structural fix, the school complex. This groups one central secondary school with surrounding primary schools. By linking these nodes, the cluster shares high-value assets. Instead of buying microscopes for every building, schools share elite labs, libraries, and specialized instructors. Consolidating this infrastructure cuts deep into systemic waste. The government can then take the capital freed up from redundant overhead and redirect it into targeted investments for vulnerable students. Standard funding formulas often miss students facing compounded geographic, historical, or gender-based exclusion. The policy groups these demographics together as socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, or SEGs. To deploy capital exactly where it's needed, the system uses tools like the Gender Inclusion Fund. This pays for precise interventions: working sanitation facilities, conditional cash transfers, and bicycles, ensuring female and transgender students can physically reach class and stay enrolled. In areas with dense, underserved populations, the government establishes special education zones. By layering state and central funding schemes in these specific districts, the local infrastructure receives a massive, concentrated upgrade. Moving from generic spending to this kind of hyper-localized financial engineering systematically dismantles the specific physical barriers keeping marginalized communities in poverty.
The system also expands funding for alternative pathways, for the children of migrant laborers, or those who simply cannot attend a daily physical campus. Open schooling networks provide fully equivalent certifications. For students living too far from a regional school complex, the state is expanding free, high-quality boarding facilities, matching the rigorous standards of elite academies. The policy also structures legal integration for public philanthropic partnerships. This opens the door for community resources, private donations, and crowdsourcing to fund new infrastructure and produce high-quality textbooks at exact cost. By combining top-down state efficiency with localized community philanthropy and alternative schooling, the policy weaves a financial safety net designed to catch every demographic. When you optimize how resources are shared at the top and hyper-target financial aid at the bottom, the crushing cost of education shifts completely off the shoulders of individual families. High-quality learning ceases to be a specialized commodity reserved for those who can afford to pay for it. It operates exactly as it should, as an efficient, guaranteed public service. Maximizing the talent of the youth population is the only way India continues its ascent on the global stage. This interconnected financial structure proves that true equity is the ultimate economic engine.
Look at global employment forecasts, and you'll see a clear pattern. Machine learning and data science are rapidly absorbing millions of routine, unskilled jobs. For India to thrive in this landscape and secure a spot as a global knowledge superpower, the traditional model of rote memorization simply won't work anymore. The future demands adaptable, multidisciplinary critical thinkers. The National Education Policy 2020 addresses this crisis by mandating a total systemic overhaul of India's learning infrastructure. This flowchart shows exactly where that overhaul begins, right at the individual timeline. The decades-old 10+2 rigid structure breaks apart here, replaced by a dynamic 5+3+3+4 framework. This new tiering matches actual cognitive development, starting from foundational early childhood care all the way through flexible secondary studies. Rewiring a nation's workforce requires a complete restructuring of the daily path of the individual student, but a new structure is useless if the basics aren't there. That's why the policy establishes a hard, urgent target: achieve universal foundational literacy and numeracy for every primary school student by 2025. Once those basics are secured, the system has to measure progress differently. The high-stakes end-of-year board exams that fuel an exhausting coaching culture are being phased out in favor of regular, continuous assessments. To regulate this shift, the government is setting up a new standard-setting body called PARAKH. Its mandate is to monitor learning outcomes across the country and ensure tests measure actual skill, not just memorization. This radar chart illustrates how that measurement actually works for the student. Instead of a simple percentage, students receive a 360-degree multidimensional progress card. Notice how it tracks the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor domains equally. In any large ecosystem, the things we measure are the things we value. By redesigning the grading metrics, the policy alters the definition of student capability. You can rewrite the curriculum and change the exams, but none of it matters if the person standing at the front of the classroom isn't equipped to deliver it. To address this, the policy sets a rigorous new baseline. By 2030, the absolute minimum qualification for teaching will be a comprehensive 4-year integrated Bachelor of Education degree, and the training doesn't stop at graduation. Every educator and school leader is required to complete at least 50 hours of continuous professional development every single year to keep their methods sharp. This diagram shows how those hours pay off. The newly established National Professional Standards for Teachers, or NPST, creates a transparent metric. A teacher's ongoing training feeds directly into their performance appraisal, determining their tenure and merit-based promotions. To build a capable generation, the system first has to restore the autonomy, respect, and professional rigor of the people teaching them. There is, however, a massive vulnerability in this plan. Upgrading schools and teachers means very little if millions of children from socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, or SEDs, are still forced to drop out due to external barriers. Look at this map. Regions with disadvantaged populations are legally designated as special education zones. Inside these zones, a centralized gender inclusion fund targets specific hurdles,
directing funds straight into local infrastructure, like safe sanitation and secure transport for female and transgender students. On top of that, trained social workers and local counselors are deployed directly into these communities. Their job is to actively track attendance and physically rebuild the trust between marginalized families and the local schools. By removing these physical and social obstacles, the policy ensures that the high-quality curriculum actually reaches the students it was designed for. Let's zoom out to the macro level. Right now, India has tens of thousands of tiny, isolated schools, some with just a single teacher, struggling to operate without basic resources like science labs or art supplies. You can't adequately fund that many fragmented pieces. The policy solution is to consolidate them into localized school complexes. This network visualizes the blueprint. One secondary school acts as a central hub, linking primary schools and Anganwadis within a 10-kilometer radius. Connecting these nodes allows schools to share resources, giving small primaries direct access to labs, instructors, and counselors. This consolidation turns the entire cluster into a single, semi-autonomous unit, cutting down administrative waste and allowing local educators to govern themselves efficiently. This architecture links every layer of the policy into one machine. These macro-level school complexes provide the resources to support our meso-level empowered teachers, who in turn deliver the micro-level 5+3+3+4 curriculum and PARAKH assessments. Everything connects back to a single unified ecosystem.